Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Suibhne podcast, episode 3 of the Rabbit Hole podcast with me, your host, James, the creator of the YouTube channel, Suibhne. That is a terrible opening to a podcast. I've always hated those kinds of podcasts that start like that, and yet somehow my brain just immediately went that way. This is also a podcast where we wait for the first 30 seconds to a minute, that sort of delay, to make sure that the audio is working once you can pick it up on your headphones. Currently still waiting for that delay to come through. Beautiful. That just came through into my headphones, and now I can comfortably remove them, knowing that you can all hear my voice on this lovely Friday afternoon in Melbourne. I'm really enjoying doing this. I'm really enjoying doing the end of the week, the last hour or so of the week, talking to you, talking at you. Today's a big episode. Today we're going to be talking about possibly a controversial topic. And it's going to be interesting. So firstly, I have to open this bad boy up to make sure that we're all going to be playing nicely. Just making sure that our desktop is muted so that when we open the stream, you don't hear constant feedback in the background. I'm a professional YouTuber, professional streamer. I am always going to be the number one streamer. I'm definitely going to be the number one streamer. Give me like a year. I reckon give me a year and I'll be the number one streamer on the platform. Today we're going to be talking about something quite controversial. There's this thing called the Battle of Kosovo. In last week's episode, we talked a little bit about the Serbian sacred dynasty. And this was what we had on screen, some beautiful artwork from the artist Ravignon, who also has a terrific YouTube channel, which you should check out. It'll be somewhere in the description below, or you can see it just on screen there. That is a link to her Blue Sky account, where you can also find access to everything she's doing. And we got into the nitty-gritty a little bit about the Serbian sacred dynasty and this foundational origin of their political state, this political entity in the Middle Ages. Now, that of course was talked a lot about mythology and myth making, that kind of thing. So if you haven't already watched that episode, this is going to sort of build up on that one, but you don't have to watch these in sequential order, because I'm not really telling this story in a sequential order, in case you weren't aware. But yeah, the feedback has been good. I was thinking at the beginning of these episodes, it might be a good idea in future to do a little bit of feedback right at the beginning. The issue with that is that absolutely nobody is watching this podcast. Well, I say nobody. There's been a few hundred views and there's been sort of modest feedback. And I think maybe in the future I'll definitely want to talk to you a little bit more of a back and forth. So please comment something below if you want to talk. I don't know how big this is going to get, but I'd love to actually address your comments and that kind of thing. Now, if you want a guaranteed chance to get your question read out on the air, and then I can talk to you about it, I can answer your question or your comment or whatever, you can just if you want to guarantee that happens, eventually we're going to have super chats set up once the channel is monetized. But if you want to guarantee that now, you can become a Patreon member, and I post all these episodes there. If you want to make a comment down below that episode, I will absolutely read it the next time. You don't even have to be, a Patreon for, you don't have to be on Patreon for longer than, like just like one cycle, like 1 month or anything like that. No matter how long, if you chuck a comment on that in the Patreon, I will answer it here. Same goes for the YouTube members. So on the main channel, there will be a YouTube members tab where I will be posting these episodes. If you want to put a comment or a question there, you can do that, and I will answer it on the following episode, because we do not have super chats currently enabled. The other way is you can do, I think in the description, there will be a link to the Streamlabs, like super chat version, that kind of thing. I don't know how that works on my end. Like, if you want to give it a red hot go, I'll see if maybe a notification pops up on this side. But basically all of those versions of things will get you a comment answered or whatever. But hopefully when this grows and I do like a proper launch, we'll actually have something to talk about in this section of the podcast. But for now, we will not be doing that. Actually, there are some comments from the previous one I did want to talk about. Okay, yes, I did get modest feedback, but I was thinking about maybe saving it till the end. Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking about maybe saving this for the end. Yeah, if you want to follow me, you can do it on Blue Sky. If you see on screen there's also a little counter. I'm trying to get I'm trying to get YouTube to like actually tell me how many subscribers I need to get up to monetization. So I think I need 87 more. That counter on the screen should be live. I don't know if it's live or not. I'll have to wait and see in the future when somebody actually subscribes. Is that counter going to go up one? So we need to get to 500 subbies, so chuck us a sub, will ya? Chuck us a sub and we can all be friends. And I can continue to do this for a living, I want to grow this bad boy out, give it some lush locks, start combing it out. You can tell that I'm dancing around this topic, right? Like, I don't really want to talk about Kosovo, but I do. I really, really do. Because this is crazy. It's easily the most mythologized battle in history. It's got to be certainly up there. There's a lot of other, like, bigger and more famous battles for sure. But this one is just crazy. I've got a book called The Serbs by a terrific author named Tim Judah, and I've been really enjoying his work. So he wrote a book called The Serbs: History, Myth, and the Destruction of Yugoslavia. So it's sort of a good overview of the history of Yugoslavia through the lens of its dominant ethnic group, the Serbs, and of course, talking about the origin of the Croatian Serbs and the Bosnian Serbs and Serbs that live in other nation states that exist today, like North Macedonia and Albania and Montenegro. It's this like very overarching, good overview, and he's talking specifically about these national myths, and it's been very, very helpful. Terrific read. I'm gonna read you an excerpt from this book, and I'm gonna read you a paragraph that sort of really sells this idea of Kosovo, and then we'll maybe unpack it a little bit. In all of European history, it is impossible to find any comparison with the effect of Kosovo on the Serbian national psyche. The battle changed the course of Serbian history, but its immediate strategic impact was far less than many subsequently came to believe. Its real, lasting legacy lay in the myths and the legends which came to be woven around it, enabling it to shape the nation's historical and national consciousness. This came about through a particular set of historical and political circumstances in the decades following the battle. A legend was created around the character of Lazar, primarily by monks, which was later preserved through the tradition of cycles of epic poetry. These provided a link to past glory and, more importantly, an inspiration for the Serbs in the 19th century and during the Balkan Wars, when the time was ripe to shrug off Ottoman domination. No other battle in history, particularly in European history, is as mythologized as this battle, and it's kind of weird why. That's the question that is very hard to answer for modern historians, because it's complicated. You know, you can't sort of boil these things down to one thing. But the battle itself is for at its time was somewhat unremarkable. So what do I mean by that? Let's turn back the clock a bit and have a look at what's going on the screen. So here you can see some more beautiful artwork by the same artist, Ravignon, depicting one of the most famous paintings of the battle. And that painting is, you know, I believe it still hangs within the patriarchal cathedral in Belgrade, if I'm not mistaken. There's a few famous depictions of this battle. This is just the one I felt was the most interesting looking. The subject of the battle is quite intense and chaotic, the subject of the painting, and I thought that this would make a good recreation for the upcoming video. So yeah, just wanted to point this out. Talk about how we got here. You know, last week we were talking about how the Serbs sort of had this very mythologized family, this like family origin story of the Nemanjić dynasty, these larger than life, spiritually pure, holy kings, this dynasty that came forth out of them. And they were sort of seeing themselves as like, you know, they were taking part in this tradition of being the successor of Rome. You know, it's like the oldest cliche in European monarchy about being the successor of Rome. You know, you want to claim authority. You want to get people to do what you want them to do. Cool. Just claim to be the true successor of Rome. Rome is this like, in itself, it's like this like super mythologized thing that you sort of need to like harken back to. And the Roman Empire was this, like, you know, obviously such a large and powerful empire, probably the largest the European, you know, the world has ever seen in terms of its impact. Obviously, like geographically, it wasn't the largest. There were larger empires, but in terms of its impact on the European continent and then thus the rest of the world, it's huge. You know, you can go to South America today, and they'll have legislative symbols in their parliaments of the various countries of Latin America, for example, and they would have symbols and motifs and Roman columns, you know, exemplifying this. You know, America, the United States, famously has like tons of like visual imagery of the Roman Empire. It's just one of these things that is so embedded in Western culture and Western society. It's this thing that has just touched everything throughout history. And so claiming like Roman authority is just kind of like it's like a game. It's like a buzzword for claiming authority. And you've had various political entities throughout European history claiming to be the true successor of Rome. And because the Roman state in its like last legs was this imperial force that was very much a marriage, a constitutional marriage between secular and spiritual authority. You have the head of the church and the head of the state is the emperor, and the two are like the two pillars. They're intertwined. So civil authority is very much intertwined with religious authority. And that's something that is incredibly inherited by these Slavic polities that made up what would eventually become Serbia. They were like, we're, you know, kings now, we have divine right. The divine right of monarchs is a concept that was eventually became quite influential in the Middle Ages. It was like, well, you know, you're a king because God says you're a king and blah, blah, blah. You know, we've discussed this at length. If you're a fan of the channel and have been for a long time, you know that I've been talking about this stuff ad nauseum for a very long time. And I just can't get over it, how much of these European monarchies sort of try and stretch back and say that they have this authority, this like God-given right authority. And then they do everything in their power to like try and make it do what it says on the tin. They try to like create these independent patriarchates and independent churches that'll eventually make it so that they have control and they can exemplify being that true successor. Like, we can't be the real successor of Rome unless we also have our own church and we have our own emperor. That kind of thing. And I talked about last week a little bit about the Bulgarian Empire and how they were one of the first of these like new Slavic political entities that decided that they wanted to take over that title for themselves. And that was something that was very influential on the Serbs. The Serbs sort of sat there and went, oh, cool, yeah, no, we want to do that too. But also there's, you know, it's more complicated than that. They were saying we actually believe that we are the true successors, or we should be the true successors. And a lot of it's tied into just wanting power. There's a lot of like seeking power and glory and that sort of thing. You know, these Serbian monarchs, part of the Nemanjić family, they would build these monasteries. I talked about this last week. They would build these monasteries and then like plaster themselves all over them in gorgeous mosaics, and then they would be buried there or nearby in another monastery or one that they helped renew. And it would cost an incredible amount of money, like the kind of money that we sort of take for granted today, because so much of our economy is so based in like moving money around, like so much of our civil infrastructure and that kind of thing. But like in those days, controlling that source of wealth it's an accomplishment in and of itself. These are small kingdoms, small dynasties controlling pieces of land that aren't very big, and they've managed to create enough wealth for themselves through different means to put a lot of money into these religious endowments, these monasteries. And they say, cool, here you go, here's a lovely building, please remember me by it, and then bury me when I'm done, and then this can be my local like shrine. And that's what they became. They became shrines. And they're scattered all over the place in Serbia, in the Balkans. All of these like religious endowments, where a king would be, you know, crowned, and then he would put a bunch of money into a pot and build a monastery and then eventually get buried there. And then these little communities that grew up around these monasteries, you know, you've got like monks and nuns and priests, and they become like, you know, they do monk things. They hang around in their monk robes and they shave their heads and they do monk things. You know, they build, they hit things with hammers and cut wood and build stuff, and they make beer and they make wine and all this sort of things. It's a very, and they study, of course. The chief among these things, they study the Bible and religious texts and history and all this sorts of thing, and they write down poetry, all these sorts of like very religious, like deep spiritual practices that have become hallmarks of European Christian practice. And then when the king is sort of buried there, that becomes their shrine. That community is their shrine. And what that is a cult. It becomes a cult in the true sense of the word, a religious cult. That's like a personality cult directly around that specific king. So a lot of the time that'll be sort of a center of literature about that king and folklore about that king or queen or priest or specific bishop or metropolitans, they were called. Like these were centers of cultic activity, similar to the sort of cults that originated in sort of like ancient Greece and Rome, and that sort of cultic place. You know, they had a very geographic feeling to them because they would just, you know, oh, well, in that valley, there's a monastery there where a certain king is buried, and everybody there they're sort of in charge of keeping that king's memory alive and writing down all the stories about him, blah, 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 blah. And this is something that is not necessarily easy to do. It requires a lot of funding. It requires a lot of money, materials. You've got to teach people to write. Writing wasn't something that just everybody could do. Only a small percentage of the smallest percentage of people had the time and the money to sit down and learn how to write with an ink and quill and all that jazz. They're sitting around. And they're like, okay, we've got to write things down. Somebody could come across the hill and burn down the monastery. Some enemy could come along and destroy all your hard work, centuries of hard work, decades of hard work. So unfortunately what happens is you have this problem where it's a region of the world that is absolutely filled to the brim with war. You got the Hungarians, especially in the Middle Ages. They become a real big problem for the Serbs. They come in and they raid and they destroy things. The Hungarians destroyed so much of the early Serbian polity. What Slavic polity existed on what we call Serbia today, if any, in those very, very early times. A lot of that is just like a massive blur. We don't know all that much about it. Hello, we have our first live chatter, Sotiris Mizolis. Hi, how you doing? So we're talking about the origin of these myths and legends surrounding these kings, and a lot of what we would now call written history. This is what we call, you when you go into these records, you look at them, you read them. This is what we call history. Okay. Fascinating topic here on Suibhne. This is what we call history, when people write things down in a monastery. The problem with these Hungarians especially is that they destroy a lot of this early medieval Serbian polity. And this is reflected in the fact that we have very few records from that era, because they love to just go to a monastery on a hill and kill all the monks or enslave them, and then burn the monastery down and steal all the riches that they can get away with on horseback. And they're in, they're out, gone. That's decades or centuries worth of wealth and plunder and architecture and historical records gone. Boom. How sad. That's something called the survivorship bias. What does survive is what we have a picture of, but what didn't survive we will never know, because there is no records of it that have survived. So in come these Hungarians, they're burning down monasteries, destroying things, destroying records, and then we never get to know what was in those records. So in and of itself, the fact that anything survives from this era is quite amazing, and it shows an intense level of dedication that these monks had, because they would often hear, okay, well, there's a plague, there's a scourge among us of the Hungarians, and we need to save everything we can. And they would grab every record they could and hightail it out of there. And some of them would get away and some of them wouldn't get away. And the ones that would get away would copy those down and continue preserving those records. But unfortunately, a lot of it is lost. So it's one of those tragic things about history. As a person who loves history, tragic things for historians, where they cannot, it keeps a historian awake at night, dreaming of all the historical records throughout history that have been destroyed, thus destroying history itself. Just so sad. Anyway, the sad part about it is that we will never really know, other than through other methods of the historical method, archaeology, and there's other scientific disciplines that can help us with these things, but we'll never really know what was written down, or if anything was written down in the first place about things that happened, because it's all gone. It's all gone. It's very sad. Anyway, these little monastic communities become very important to the early history of Serbia. And one of the things that they say is that this family becomes very important and wealthy and becomes these centers of cultish activity. You got these personality cults dotted around the place. And a lot of them are in what we would consider today to be Kosovo. You look at a map, any map these days, and you'll see that there's a tiny little section of Serbia down at the bottom that is, sometimes has a little dotted line around it indicating that there is some dispute over this territory. You may have heard of it. Is called Kosovo. Is Kosovo. Now, the reason why it is dotted out there is because currently Kosovo is not fully recognized. And it's because its population is quite distinct from the rest of Serbia. It is mainly inhabited by Albanian Kosovars, who are also known to be in a lot of those neighboring countries. There's Albanian population in a lot of southeastern Europe, and chief among them, Albania. And they're very, distinct ethnically and historically and linguistically from the Serbs. They've had their own migrations, their own stories. Separate topic, right? Different rabbit hole. Like, let's stay in this rabbit hole. And they decided that they wanted to declare themselves independent, and they fought a couple of wars with the Serbs. And the problem is, there's all these monasteries in Serbia that are part of this early Serbian polity. And that, it stings. It stings the Serbs, and they go, oh, no, but hey, you took our stuff. And the Kosovo Albanian said, yeah, well, we're going to do a war, and we'll have a war. And unfortunately, what has happened now is that it's a partially recognized state because Serbia says, no, that's still part of us. That's Kosovo, yes, Serbia. Like Kosovo is Serbia. That's like the common thing that you'll hear from people who feel very passionately about this. So passionately, in fact, that they have started the occasional war over the whole thing. And a lot of this goes back to people's feelings about the medieval Serbian polities, because this Nemanjić family eventually gets this guy called Dusan. And his epithet is Dusan the Mighty, which I really love. There's too many the greats. Why do we have so many the greats and not enough the mighties? We need more the mighties, I would say, and the rambunctious and the gluttonous. Those are my favorite epithets, and I think I prefer those epithet traditions where they give you like, oh, this is like beyond the horse-legged, or Jonathan the really good at downing a pint in 60 seconds kind of epithets. I prefer those. They're so much more descriptive. What does the mighty actually tell you? It just tells you, oh, well, he was good at something, like undescript, like, oh, okay, oh, right, you're great, you're Alexander the Great, okay, well, cool. But the mighty, slightly better. I would say I'd put that up from like F tier to like, I don't know, E tier in terms of an improvement. So Dusan the Mighty decides, I'm gonna take over the Balkans. I'm gonna take over Europe. And I had here an image of the Balkans, and I forgot to put it up, obviously, because why would I be organized? And I'll see if I can do it now while we are streaming. Bear with me for like 3 seconds. We're so professional. This is so professional. Okay, here we go. I'm opening up a screenshot from a YouTube channel called Ollie Bai. He does these like animated maps that are very helpful. Here we have a map of the Balkans just before the Battle of Kosovo. Now, ignore what is on your screen right now for a second, but like just sort of geographically orientate yourself in where we are in the world. Prior to this, you'll notice on screen there is a bunch of like little states where a Serbia should be, and that is not a mere accident. So when this guy Dusan the Mighty comes on the scene, he says, "Wow, we're really strong and powerful, and the Byzantine Empire, it just can't hack it anymore. They are not doing very well. They're dying. They're bleeding out. They've been poisoned. They're not doing too hot. They've been in the wars, literally and figuratively. They've been sacked by the Crusaders. They've been plundered. They're being invaded by Islamic hordes of Turks, these infidels coming from the east. These spooky, scary infidels are coming. They're coming to the Balkans and they're taking over the Byzantine Empire. It's all very sad and all very panicky and apocalyptic. That's essentially the geopolitical backstory in a nutshell. The Eastern Romans, these Byzantines that can trace their lineage to the old Republic of Rome, the last vestige of its once great powerful empire, is dying. It's slowly being subsumed by all of these other polities. And eventually, they're weakening enough that everybody else is starting to take a chunk. So famously, the Bulgarians came in and took a chunk, and then the Normans were coming in, and the Genoese were coming in, and the Venetians were coming in. These are all people coming in to take a little bite out of the corpse of the Eastern Roman Empire. Very similar to how these other polities and other countries and nations started taking bites out of the Ottoman Empire. A lot closer to our time, to our contemporary time. Very similar. And it's interesting because it's all happening on the same piece of land. It's always this like same sort of Balkans, Anatolia, the Levant. It's this, and Arabia and all that kind of stuff. These two empires, the Byzantines and then the Ottomans who take over from the Byzantines, they're operating in basically the same piece of land, the same pieces of land. And in many ways, they fell due to the same reasons, even though it happened centuries apart. But that's a different rabbit hole. That's a different rabbit hole for a different day. So, where was I? The Romans, the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, they're falling, and Serbian kings are like making bank. They're selling mercenaries. They're getting involved in wars. They're helping out Hungarians. They're occasionally getting invaded by Hungarians. These are medieval politics going on. It's nothing simple, but they're generally doing pretty well because they're nabbing more land. And the way feudalism works, it's essentially a real estate enterprise. It is a real estate scam. That's what feudalism is. It is essentially just a real estate scam, and they needed more real estate, so they started lapping up all the cheap real estate. Or that meme, it's free real estate. That's what the Serbs end up doing. The medieval Serbian lords and kings. They decide, cool, we're gonna go jump into all these free real estate. They're gonna lap it up cheap, and they're gonna flip it and put in some new tenants into those bits of the old Roman Empire, and they're going to jack up the rent. It's all going to be terrible for the people living there, but it's going to be great for Serbia because they're going to have all this great new real estate. They're updating their portfolios. It's all going to be great. So in they come and they start getting really big, and this sort of they've got some swagger, they've got a little bit of a spring in their step. They're like, oh, not only are we getting really rich and powerful and lapping up a lot of land, but we're starting to look like maybe we might be the ones that are supposed to be the true successors of Rome, because of course they're always like, yeah, we're the successor of Rome, but no, for real this time, let's actually try and make it to the Constantinople throne. So this Nemanjić family become quite famous for getting obsessed with getting that throne, and they weren't the only ones, not by a long shot. The Bulgarians were trying to do it. The Normans wanting to do it. You had this Latin they call it the Latin Empire, but it didn't call itself that. It just called itself the Roman Empire. Basically, all these crusading armies coming from Europe, they sacked Constantinople, which is what I was talking about before, and they set up this new Latin Empire, and it was supposed to be this like restoration of Latin or Roman authority in this last vestige of Rome. There's too much Rome. There's too much Rome in all of this. It's like one Rome is fighting the other Rome, but the other Rome is called Constantinople, but sometimes we call it Byzantium. There's too many Romes, too many Romes. There's too many the Greats, and there's too many the Romes and the Romans. Okay? People need to just, calm down with the Greats and the Romes. And they're all sort of trying to take over this and succeed this Eastern Roman Empire, and to varying degrees of success. My mouth is so dry, I need to take a little water break. I should probably mute the microphone when I do that for next time. So the Serbs start lapping up a bunch of land, and they start to do really well. They're taking in these big, chunky parts of former Roman territory, through conquest and marriage and interdynastic links. It's primarily Greek areas. These are primarily Greek and some other Slavs and Albanian areas that they're going into. So ethnically and culturally and historically quite different from these Serbian dynasties. But, national identity in that way didn't exist. It's just more of a we've looked back on these times and gone, okay, yeah, they're Greeks, they're Albanians, whatever. And they start intertwining themselves into these dynasties. They marry into them. They set up lordships, new chunks of real estate. They're to charge the tenants rent or whatever, because they're in the middle of a housing crisis. And what else are we gonna do but lap up all the real estate and charge more rent? What was I saying? So they start to get pretty big, and they're like gunning it. Like each like king sort of says to his next king, like the next prince in line to the throne, and says, "Hey, look, we're getting bigger and more powerful. Let's keep getting more bigger and powerful. You continue my work, dear boy, dear son or daughter." I don't actually know if they're primarily in male primogeniture. I don't that seems to have slipped my mind if it's purely the boys who succeed. But I know there were a couple of empress consorts. Anyway, different rabbit hole, different time. They've established quite a big chunk of territory. You cannot currently see that big chunk of territory on the map right now because unfortunately it didn't last. It got really big. It got too big too quickly, and it had a lot of trouble staying together because this is European feudalism. Now, the funny thing about feudalism is like it's really easy to like conquer land and inherit land and like marry yourself into land. It's a lot harder to keep that land all together if you're not like prepared for it. And the Nemanjić dynasty, these kings, they were, let's just say they weren't quite prepared. They wrote all these new laws. I think Dusan's Code is the name for this thing, this like new law that they wrote. And basically it was kind of like a constitution, We're going to say, okay, well, we've got all this land. Let's make like one sort of foundational law that will govern us all together. And the problem is that didn't work very well. You had, it was kind of like every old part of Dusan's empire or Dusan's area, spoiler alert, it becomes an empire, but all the old parts, or the Serbian parts of this early kingdom, they get Dusan's Code and they throw out all their other codes and they go, cool, this will be our new law. The problem is that all those southern areas, those places that they took away from the Romans, from the Eastern Romans, they already had laws, and a lot of the time the negotiations with those people said, well, okay, well, you don't have to get rid of your law, but you will put Dusan's Code on top of your law. So we've got your law and our law together. And the problem with having that is there's just too many laws. They're lords, and they're all waking up in the morning and looking at themselves in the mirror, thinking, "How am I going to remember all these laws? There's too many laws. I can barely read. I can barely stay awake when somebody else is reading the laws." They're having an existential crisis, these lords and ladies of these new territories, because they're really struggling with all these laws. So what eventually ends up happening is that Dusan's empire, Dusan's big kingdom, he does his little Dusan's code. Cool, we've got a brand new state, and he decides I'm sufficiently big now. My kingdom is sufficiently big, and I've taken enough Roman territory to the point where I'm going to be comfortable talking about myself. I'm going to be comfortable being the emperor. I am just the emperor now. And initially, the idea is like, okay, we'll go take Constantinople because it's this super old imperial symbol. It's this like important city. And if you wanted to be emperor before that, you sort of like worked your way up the chain, or you overthrew the previous emperor, or you did a little court coup. And there were Serbian lords and stuff like that inside the court of the Byzantine emperor. They existed within that imperial system, and they could have done little coups and that kind of thing. But they decided, okay, well, instead of doing it that way, that old school way, we're just gonna like call ourselves emperors now, and then we'll take Constantinople later. Like, I need the crown, I need the gold, I need the bling now, and then Constantinople later. Kind of like the Bulgarians. The Bulgarians were like, oh, I'm a Caesar now. We got Caesars, and so they had their Tsars of Bulgaria before they even took Constantinople, but they never get Constantinople. Constantinople is too big, and they never get it. And the Serbs would never get it. They decided that they were going to crown themselves emperors early, and I think it was in Skopje, which is this big city in what is now northern Macedonia. I don't actually remember if it was Skopje. It might have been in Pech, which is also in North Macedonia. Who cares? I know that like the area around North Macedonia became very important politically to Dusan's empire. So he decides, cool, I'm emperor now. I'm going to take that title, and I'm going to be Tsar, which just means Caesar. And that's kind of the same thing we were talking about in last week's episode, how Caesar is technically like the deputy. You're like the deputy of the sheriff, and the real sheriff is the Basileus or Bacillus, and the real Roman Empire. So they get this title, Tsar, which means Caesar, and they call themselves emperors now. Great. They've got a lovely empire. And then Dusan goes and dies, which is so tragic, too soon, too young, gone but not forgotten. And his son comes along, and he he gets perhaps the worst epithet. So we've got Dusan the Mighty. We're talking about epithets before. We've got Stefan Dusan, whose full name was Stefan Uroš IV Dusan, which means something or other. I don't remember. But he's Dusan the Mighty. That's what he's remembered as. And, because he's presumably quite a strong guy. His son, whose full name was Stefan Uroš V, got quite a different epithet. His was the Weak, which is just also so tragic. You just can't live up to Daddy, Dusan the Mighty. You work your whole life to become the son of a despot. You raise through the ranks to become a what do you call it when you get a job? Nepotism. Like he gains this nepotism job. This job through nepotism, and suddenly finds himself emperor because daddy was emperor, and he worked so hard to become emperor, and he just gets the weak as his epithet. Poor guy. That sucks for him. And the reason why he was called the weak was because the crows started swarming. The not the crows. Oh, I guess the crows, but like the vultures started swarming as soon as Dusan the Mighty died, and sort of picked apart this empire. Picked it apart willy-nilly into tiny little pieces, and that's kind of what you're seeing on screen there. You're seeing all these sort of like central bits with that sort of like grayish sepia white tone in the middle. You've got Moravian, Serbian, Brankovic, and Zeta, Manjevcevic, all these little like pieces. Those are all pieces that like got taken away from old Dusan the Weak. Poor guy. He's just, people are coming in left, right, and center, just taking chunks of his empire. And he just can't keep it together because all those lords, they're waking up in the morning and they're looking at Dusan's code and they're going, nah, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a part of this. And they start taking chunks away. And you can't really blame them, can you? It's reading is hard and doing laws is hard. It's much easier to just like get an army together and decide that this is going to be your piece of land now, and you're just going to pay lip service to the emperor. And that's essentially what happens. And there are all these like extensions of the sacred dynasty. So the Nemanjić family, got cousins and uncles and aunties and blah blah blah, and so is adopted. And then there's that weird one that doesn't look quite like a Nemanjić, but if you kind of think, oh, he kind of looks a little bit more like the mailman, but I guess we'll just kind of agree that he's a Nemanjić. You got a big extended family, right? It's a normal family, and then you've got all these like powerful lords who have connections. It's very Game of Thronesy, right? There's other families. You've got the Brankovic family, and you've got all these other people who are connected in some way to the sacred dynasty, because that's their like symbol of authority. Is like, oh no, we're connected, we're kin, we're connected through the sacred dynasty. And they would draw these beautiful family trees in their house, and they'd say, look, see, my great grandfather's auntie's mailman child was once the emperor. Cool. That's how these things happen, and you have basically these like rival claimants, and then you got some down here at the bottom. There's like a rival Greek claimant to the throne, and he says he's the real emperor. And then there's another guy over here, and you have these civil wars and stuff. Basically, you start to look pretty weak, right? Which is why he gets the name Dusan the Weak. The whole thing's falling apart around him, and then he dies, and it's so sad. And he dies without an heir, and there's no more real fully recognized emperor. And then along comes a guy named Lazar, Prince Lazar, and he gets pretty. He like almost nails it, right? Like he's like, oh well, what I want to do. He comes from a noble family called Hrebeljanović. Sorry, I apologize to all the Serbs that had to hear that. So Lazar Hrebeljanović, and he gets really powerful in a place called Moravian Serbia, which you can see on the map right there at the top. He comes to power in his own little fiefdom, his own little tiny kingdom. And he's a prince. He's originally like a grand prince or a jupan. I can't remember his exact title, what he was. His father, blah, blah, blah. I'm just sort of kind of reading in the background. Right, so he came up in... He had close connections to Dusan the Mighty. He had close connections to that sort of thing. He's gaining his job through nepotism. All the nepo babies. It's almost like this entire system is built on nepo babies. Like, what is going on? What is feudalism even doing? Are they even trying to have a democratic system? I don't think so. I think we need like a revolution, but like a really like a Frenchy one, like a Anyway, so he decides, okay, I'm gonna make a go for it. I want to become the emperor, but he doesn't have like enough connection to the Sacred Dynasty. Like, he's got some connection, but not a full connection. So he doesn't have like full support. So he's like allying himself. He's allying with the Hungarians, and he's allying with the Bosnians, and he's doing good things, and he's trying, and he's defeating any rivals, and he's making his kingdom a bit bigger, and it's all looking good. Like, you could sort of foresee a time where this himself springs forth his own little sacred dynasty, perhaps. But maybe there would be Sacred Dynasty 2.0 in Serbia had this been more successful. But he becomes, generally speaking, he becomes the most powerful prince, lordling thing in the remnants, the remaining pieces of Dusan's empire. And there's another famous family called Brankovic, their last name Brankovic, and they sort of end up taking that little chunk of piece right there in the middle that you can see. They're all sort of vying and connected in a way, and they're sort of allying and doing politics to try and restore this empire. But the problem is that the Ottomans are arriving, and they're sort of like, the Ottomans are this dynasty that we discussed a little bit before. They have the House of Osman, was this like very famous warlord who himself was a descendant of all these Turks that had migrated into Anatolia in the preceding century. And they'd migrated in, and they really did a number on the Eastern Romans. They really sort of came in and overtook the valleys in between the cities. They became really powerful. And one of them, the House of Osman, he set himself up to slip into the power vacuum that was arising and start carving himself little pieces of free real estate. And the Romans occasionally hired the Turks and said, can you please come and be mercenaries for us? And so the Turks are not only getting wealthy in this way by taking payment and plunder during their wars, but they're also like learning the land. They're coming into the Balkans, and they're seeing across the water, and they're seeing all these rich, beautiful Greek Roman cities around, and they're going, this looks nice. And they're like making little maps, and they're drawing little things, and they're like, don't go that way. There's a lot of mosquitoes that way, and down here there's a nice river that is good, but that one over there, that one's not so good. They're learning. They're learning a bit about the Balkans. The problem is that kind of sets them up to be good conquerors, and then they eventually decide, hey, we wanna take over. Like, we're gonna stay. You wanted us to leave. You were packing us up and trying to give us the hint that you wanted us to leave, us Ottomans, but we're going to stay. And they decided to stay. Along they come, and everyone else is like fighting each other, and then they realize, oh crap, oh boy, good golly, damn it, we're being overrun. We're being overrun. And Prince Lazar says, well, I want to be emperor. I'm going to fight the Ottomans. I'm going to take a big army with my allies, and we're going to go down, and we're going to go fight the Ottomans. And I'm going to marry a princess from the Nemanjić dynasty and have a kid. And then my kid will be like legit, because not only do I have like the material support and the big army, and I'm kicking ass and taking names, but I also have a blood connection to the Nemanjić dynasty. So these are all good things. This might be a road toward getting yourself recognized as emperor. And he decides, I'm going to go fight the Turks. I'm going to defeat them. And then what'll happen is everyone's going to be on my side. We're going to restore the empire. And I'm going to install my son as to the throne. And I will be his regent, and I will rule in his name until one day he is old enough to rule on his own. And that'll be how it'll come about. And in the future, we'll just all laugh and laugh about this time, this little blip in our history where the empire nearly fell apart, and it'll be a distant memory, and we'll be sitting around the fire telling stories about that time and just getting so much joy about the fact that we restored the empire, and this will all be a distant memory. Also, Prince Lazar thought, because none of that worked out, he got an army together, and the king of Bosnia sent an army as well, and his one of his lordlings that was sort of pledging fealty to him, Vuk Brankovic, also had a family connection to him. I can't remember if it's like a nephew or a cousin or something, but these three get together an army, and they go down to a very, very fortified part of the empire. Back when the Serbian Empire was first just getting going, when it was just starting, it sort of set up shop in Kosovo because it had this like large open plain in sort of close to the central Kosovo now. It's called like the Kosovo Plain, but it has other names. I don't know those names. If you know those names, keep it to yourself. So they march down, and they're like, okay, well, we want to go to this sort of central open plain. It's got good visibility. We're going to meet them there. And not only that, but also it is this like center of like very like well fortified history. I can't remember which member of the dynasty, but one of the members of the dynasty like set up a huge like capital in Kosovo. And the capital was sort of like a couple of very well fortified castles, sort of stretched a bit apart, and then like an island in the middle of a big lake in this Kosovo field. Like it was this really crazy thing, and there's like almost zero records of it and zero archaeological exploration of it, but it's there somewhere. It's somewhere in that sort of part of Kosovo. It was this big fortified area, and it was just like a good place to be. It was close to the former royal capital, and very well fortified, and like a good spot. And you know, they were like, okay, we'll meet them on Kosovo Field. It's where it'll be symbolic. It'll be great. We're gonna meet them there, and it'll be, what day shall we meet them? We'll meet them on this holy day. It'll be on the feast day of Saint Vitus the Martyr, who was martyred in some or other century, presumably. And it was supposed to be like, you know, you could already tell that like the chroniclers and the monks were already writing the history. They were writing it before it happened. They were like, oh, we met them at Kosovo Field, and God blessed us because it was the holy day of Saint Vitus's festival, and we destroyed the Turkish army, and we destroyed the infidel, and we drove them out of Christendom, and we drove them out of Europe. You know, you could just tell they were like piecing together this mythologized story before it had even happened. You know, you could just like feel it, or that's what they were doing. It had to have all these important signifiers and symbols of power to be successful, and unfortunately it was not successful. They met the Turks on the field, and you know, we don't have that many records of the battle. There are a few that survive, but they're so like completely unreliable because they're written in this like very like patriotic kind of way. They're written in this like full on poetry kind of it's a glaze fest. They're trying, and they're trying to sort of be literary about it. It's part of a literary tradition of this like epic cycle of poetry, biblical in proportion, like apocalyptic. And that means that, you know, these are completely unreliable records. And there's like conflicting records on the Ottoman side, and that, so we don't know really what happened. But what we do know is that like there was no clear winner of this battle. It was just like a slaughter. It was like a blood fest, and nobody really came out on top. It was sort of like it was a done deal for both sides. And Prince Lazar dies on this battle. I'm going to cut back to that image. What you can see, if I can do it, what you can see here is a picture of the chaotic battle that is ensuing. And sort of to the left in the middle there, you can see Prince Lazar with his white beard being pulled off of the battlefield. That is him that has been mortally wounded in battle. Very sad. You know, oh, it was gonna be great. Oh, my kid was gonna go on the throne, and I was gonna get a fancy hat, and I was gonna be, you know, the restorer of the Serbian Empire. But oh gosh darn it, I've been wounded, and I'm being pulled off the battlefield because I'm about to die. So it's very sad. You know, he's quite sad that he's about to die, and that all of his dreams have been smashed to bits. And in this photo, you're seeing sort of the main subject in this painting that you can see there is the sort of central heroic figure. And I don't know for sure if it's meant to be depicting somebody, another noble, a knight, like a landed knight. And he is supposedly responsible for killing the Sultan, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Murad. So basically what we're seeing here is the Sultan and the prince died at this battle, which sucks. Like, that's super sad. Both of them trying to build their empires, neither one is able to. And the Sultan, nobody can agree on how the Sultan died. Did he die during the battle? By some sort of valiant divine, like a lightning bolt from the heavens? Did that kill the Sultan, or did this landed knight, this brave noble warrior, did he sneak into the campsite at night and slay the Sultan as he slept after or before the battle? Nobody knows for sure, but we sure can postulate about it at nauseum. Either way, these two die, and this battle becomes so central to the Serbian story, because eventually the Ottomans come in, and they manage to control. They're controlling enough territory that it's really like a blip for them. They kind of lose at this battle in a way, because they lose all their troops and they're not able to really consolidate anything. But it turns out to be it didn't mean that much, because they're able to muster a brand new army and a brand new sultan and come along and continue their conquest mostly unhindered. And the problem with that is, like, the Serbs, to tell it from their records, the Serb historians from their records say, hey, no, we defeated them. Like, we killed the Sultan guy. We sacrificed ourselves. We sacrificed our blood, and it was this great martyrdom. You know, like Saint Vitus, the martyr. We were martyring ourselves on the fields of Kosovo. This is basically, in a nutshell, what they say to all the other people who will listen. We stopped the Turks. We killed the Sultan. We got them. We did it. We did a good. It was great. Yes, we died and we lost our prince, but we halted their advance. And of course, that advance was not halted for very long. So it sort of becomes this like event of like heroic self-sacrifice, this like one last stand against the enemy. And that is sort of the background of this. And I think there's obviously so much more to talk about this. So I think we're going to talk about that in the next episode, where the myth goes and why it becomes so important. I was going a little bit longer than I was expecting to, because I'm going to do a bonus episode for patrons and YouTube members directly after this. We're going to talk a little bit more about Kosovo, or we're going to talk about something else. I don't know. If that is something you feel like you're inclined to, if that sounds like your cup of tea, please join the Patreon or become a YouTube member on the main YouTube channel, and I will be posting the bonus episode for you there. Otherwise, I will see you next week. But before we do that, actually, because I'm a very organized person, let's do the housekeeping, and let's talk about those comments from last time. So, oh yeah. What have I got here? I took some screenshots of the comments I wanted to address, and now I can't find them because I am not very well organized. Okay. Somebody, Ironic Opinions, says, thank you for putting work into the main channel vids. That is a YouTube member, so appreciate that. This one I thought was quite interesting. I saw if you made this comment, Mark Ogriki 5769 says the previous episode on the comment on the previous episode said it's not true for modern history in Serbia. We learn about the changing alliances of Serbian rulers in the beginning. Very few people to no one really connect Serbia to Romans in the modern times, and the context of that comment is talking about how Serb historians of the Middle Ages, those chroniclers writing their annals and that kind of thing, sort of say, no, we've always been loyal to the Romans, and in reality, they weren't any more loyal than anybody else, right? That is completely true. Nowadays you will learn those things, but that's only true for the modern times because we have the lens of academic history. There have been several lenses that have passed since the Middle Ages. You've got this like Enlightenment lens that sort of came about to sort of resurrect all these myths and talk about them at length, and mythologize over them and create nationalism. And intertwined in that is what we call academic history, where we don't just look at the historical records. We do an investigation in the same way that a journalist looks into something. We do a little bit of investigative reporting on records from centuries ago. That's what the academic discipline is. So that's something that informs the modern teaching of history, right? It's you can't believe everything you read in a nutshell. That's kind of the nutshell of what academic history is. And nowadays, yeah, you are taught about those shifting alliances, about how, these Serbian political leaders of the times of the Middle Ages were loyal to the Hungarians and then to the Normans and the Venetians, and had shifting alliances with different nobility and that kind of thing. So yes, absolutely. I just wanted to address that because I'm terrible at getting my point across, generally speaking, and I thought that it would be much easier to clarify that over on an episode, rather than trying to type all that out. Because yes, modern study of history is extremely different to an antiquated study of history. And yes, Husky Cool Stop Motions became a member. Thank you very much. He also asked, what is the name of the podcast? It is this. It is the Rabbit Hole Podcast with Suibhne. It is the Suibhne Podcast, whatever you want to call it. This is episode 3. If you are listening right now, hello. How's it going? And that was all the ones from members. And then I have one comment from D. Lexley, patron, who sent me this in the DMs. Do you think these myths become so deeply held, and why do you think these myths become so deeply held and intense? Didn't people become more aware of national myths being dramatized / exaggerated? Yes, that's a hard question to answer. We're kind of going to cover it in another episode, but the reason why is the Serb state eventually collapses and they fall to the Ottomans, and they become a diaspora community. So a lot of the Serbs obviously remain within the Ottoman Empire. A lot of them end up in diaspora, living in exile within Central Europe and in the Holy Roman Empire and in Venice. And they kept their myths alive because that was like a part of their identity. Going from this like glorious past to a stateless people, it's very common. It happens all the time in history. And the reason why these myths become so intense is because it helped them like cling to their identity. They really, sort of. There's one of the books I read was saying how like Serbian mothers would like sing songs within these like myth. They had these like mythic songs, a tradition of these mythic songs. They would like sing them to their children in the crib. You know, they would teach them poetry they would teach the poetry to their children. There's this intergenerational aspect of this that sort of pushes it all the way down and becomes really intense and really important. But yeah, that's sort of the main thesis of the video that I'm working on Serbia, and I hope you will enjoy that when it eventually comes out. Okay, that'll be all for this episode. I will see you in the bonus episode straight after this if you're one of those listening to it, and I will see you all next time.